4 days sounded like a deadline. That was probably why my brain responded to it better than my emotions did. By 8 the next morning, I had turned Friday into a sequence instead of a threat. The first thing I opened was not Paige's text. It was the operating agreement. The copy had been sitting in my records for 3 years, mostly ignored because until version 6 appeared, my 20% interest had felt more symbolic than useful. That morning, I read every section that dealt with transfer, redemption, voting, and amendments. Then I read them again. Nothing in those pages said my parents could convert silence into consent. Nothing said my disappearance transferred my interest to Paige. Nothing said a memorial dinner could substitute for my signature. The proposed redemption required me, not my memory, not my parents' interpretation of what I supposedly wanted. Me. So, I wrote a notice. Short sentences. No accusations. No mention of the stairs. No mention of my mother. I stated that I had not consented to the proposed redemption of my membership interest, had not approved version 6 of the agreement, had not authorized anyone to communicate consent on my behalf, and did not authorize any transfer, amendment, or representation based on presumed wishes. The first draft ran almost 3 pages. The final version was less than 1. Priya read it over video during her lunch break. You cut the angry paragraph. There was no angry paragraph. There were 6 sentences wearing business casual. I deleted another line. Better? Much. Anything factually wrong? No. That was all I needed from her. The operating agreement told me where company notices were supposed to go. I sent the notice there, copied the members, saved the transmission receipts, and mailed a signed copy by tracked delivery. Then I created one final chronology for myself. Version 3 received. Version 6 discovered. Email stating I would sign. Sunday dinner. Refusal. Fall. Police statement. Access changes. Financial support stopped. Professional correction sent. Non-consent delivered. 9 lines. No adjectives. The simplicity steadied me. By lunchtime, something important had changed. Friday could still be humiliating. My mother could still put my photograph on a wall and tell people what I had believed. My father could still describe my labor as devotion. Paige could still sign whatever they placed in front of her. But they could not use that room to take my ownership. They could only use it to show what they had planned to do with my absence. The distinction felt enormous. For the first time since the fall, I had secured something before the confrontation rather than hoping I could defend it during one. That afternoon, another kind of return began. My supervisor had approved a gradual schedule, and my first half-day back was remote. At 9 the following morning, I opened my work laptop from the dining table. Not the one filled with Whitmore documents. My real work computer. A hospital renovation project waited where I had left it. There were 46 unread emails, which was almost comforting. Construction had continued without me. No one had collapsed because Nora Whitmore had been unavailable. Priya messaged me. Welcome back. Don't be heroic. I typed. Offensive. I was planning to save all of commercial construction before lunch. Her reply came immediately. 2-hour limit. I smiled and opened a change order log. One subcontractor had submitted a schedule impact that did not match the dates in the supporting correspondence. The problem was ordinary, almost boring. It was wonderful. For 90 minutes, I tracked dates, compared revisions, and wrote questions nobody would interpret as disloyalty. No one told me I was difficult for noticing a mismatch. No one said numbers were less important than somebody's confidence. When I found the missing dependency, I sent a note to the project manager. He replied, "Good catch. Update the log and we'll address it tomorrow." That was it. Good catch. Not, "You're the only one who can handle this." Not, "We knew you'd fix it." A task. A contribution. A paycheck. By noon, fatigue had begun gathering behind my eyes. The old Nora would have ignored it. The newer version looked at the clock. I saved the file. Closed the laptop. My hand hovered over the lid for a moment, because stopping while work remained unfinished still felt vaguely irresponsible. Then I shut it. The building did not collapse. Another experiment, successfully completed. Thursday afternoon, Paige sent me a photograph. A stack of papers sat on what looked like our father's desk. The top page read, Personal guarantee. Below that was a management responsibility acknowledgement. Her message followed. Mom says these are just to formalize Friday. Then another. Did they ever make you sign these? I looked at the photograph carefully. I can't tell you what to sign, I wrote back. 3 dots appeared. Stopped. Returned. That's not what I asked. Fair. They asked me to sign similar guarantees. I declined. This time, her reply took longer. Mom said you always backed the company personally. I supported expenses. That is not the same thing. A minute passed. Why would she tell me that? My thumb rested over the keyboard. Because she needs another Nora. Because the machine is hungry. Because you were allowed to believe leadership meant receiving authority without absorbing risk. All of those were interpretations, so I gave Paige what I could support. Ask her which document she means. Ask for the signed copy. Paige sent a thumbs up. Nothing else. That evening, I laid out clothes for Friday. I did it without deciding to. Black pants. A dark green blouse I could pull on without fighting my injured shoulder. Low shoes. Nothing dramatic. No red dress. No cinematic resurrection costume. Just clothes that would not hurt. The outfit sat on the back of my bedroom chair while I reheated soup. Every few minutes, my eyes returned to it. By 7, I had imagined the entrance in at least 6 versions. The door opens. My mother stops speaking. Dad drops the papers. Paige turns around. People whisper. Then I cross the room and say something devastatingly concise. The fantasy embarrassed me because it felt good. Not just good. Earned. They had spoken about me as if I were an obstacle that had conveniently stopped breathing. They were preparing to place my name on a plaque while finishing the transaction I had refused. Surely I was entitled to one moment of watching them lose control. My phone buzzed. Priya, how's the shoulder? Attached to me. Still objecting. Dinner tomorrow? I knew which dinner she meant. Maybe. She called instead of texting. You're going? I didn't say that. You laid out clothes, didn't you? I stared at the bedroom chair. How do you know things? You organize emotions with office supplies. Clothing is just a textile version of a checklist. That is insulting. Is it inaccurate? I carried the phone into the living room. No. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, if you go, what do you want from the room? Truth. That's already in writing. I hated how quickly she answered. Maybe I want them to stop lying. Can you make them? No. Then what do you want from the room? The answer came before I had time to improve it. I want to see their faces. There it was. Ugly in its honesty. Priya did not tell me not to go. That helped. If she had said, be the bigger person, I might have driven there out of spite. Instead, she said, okay, okay? You're allowed to want that. The pressure in my chest eased slightly. But? I asked. No but. You definitely have a but. I have a question. Of course you do. If you never see their faces, does any of what you already did become less true? The room went very still. My lock was changed. My money was mine. My professional name was corrected. My non-consent existed. The police statement existed. The operating agreement had not changed because my mother wanted it to. My return to work plan did not require anybody at Whitmore Renovation to approve it. No, I said. Priya let the answer sit. After we hung up, I carried the green blouse back to the closet. The shoes followed. My car keys stayed on the hook by the kitchen. Friday evening arrived quietly. That almost annoyed me. The sky did not darken dramatically. Thunder did not roll across Chicago. Nothing announced that my parents were about to hold a remembrance dinner for a daughter who was sitting at home eating grilled cheese. At 6:12, Paige sent a link. They're streaming part of it for the field staff who couldn't come. You don't have to watch. I stared at the message, then opened it. The video showed a banquet room at a small hotel near Oak Park. That was all I allowed myself to know directly. Round tables, a lectern, a screen with my photograph on it. The picture was from a company holiday dinner 2 years earlier. Paige had been cropped from the original image, which struck me as almost funny considering how many times the reverse had happened. My mother stepped to the microphone. I turned the volume up. Nora always believed family came before everything. My stomach tightened. Elaine continued speaking. But I muted the stream. The sentence was enough. Of course, that was the version of me she needed. Not Nora, who said no. Not Nora, who owned 20%. Not Nora, who had asked why version 6 existed. A dead daughter was easier to love because a dead daughter could not revise the doctrine. I closed the live stream. For the next 20 minutes, nothing happened. At least nothing I knew about. That distinction had become important. No imagining the room. No inventing expressions. No narrating private conversations because they probably occurred. I washed my plate, took my evening medication, answered one work email, and then remembered I had promised myself not to. Closed the laptop again. At 6:58, Paige sent a photograph. The personal guarantee lay on a table beside the management acknowledgement. No signature. Her message read, "She put them in front of me 10 minutes before I'm supposed to speak." Another appeared. "I asked if you ever signed one." Then, she said, "Nora understood duty." I sat down. That sentence connected years of my life more efficiently than any spreadsheet could. Nora understood duty. Meaning, Nora did not ask what risk belonged to whom. Nora did not embarrass anyone by refusing publicly. Nora did not demand that the person receiving authority also receive responsibility. And now that Nora was supposedly gone, duty needed a new address. Paige sent one more message. I asked for the signed copy. She didn't give me one. I typed slowly. "Then you have your answer about what I signed." Nothing came back. For almost 15 minutes, the phone stayed dark. Then the live stream notification appeared again. Paige was speaking. I opened it. Her face looked pale under the banquet room lights. A printed speech sat on the lectern. She touched it once, then set it aside. "I was supposed to talk tonight about continuing Nora's work," she said. My breathing slowed. "I can't do that yet." Somebody moved off camera. Paige looked toward the side of the room. "Before I accept anything, I need to know what actually belonged to Nora." My mother's voice came from somewhere outside the frame. "Paige, tonight isn't the time." The microphone caught it. Paige looked down for a second, then back up. That's what we always told her. The room itself remained mostly outside the camera angle. I could hear a chair move, a cough. Nothing else I could reliably name. Paige continued. "I'm not signing the guarantee tonight. I'm not accepting the operations role tonight. And I'm not going to stand here and say Nora wanted something, when I haven't seen anything she signed saying she wanted it." My hand covered my mouth, not because she had chosen me. She hadn't. That was what made it matter. She was choosing not to step where I had stood. The old me would have wanted more. Expose the email. Read the payment totals. Tell everyone Elaine had hidden the numbers. Say my name, and announce that I was alive. Paige did none of those things. She simply refused. I'm not taking over something that only works if one daughter disappears inside it. Then, she stepped away from the lectern. The stream ended less than a minute later. I remained on my couch with the phone in my hand. No applause reached me. No view of my father. No image of my mother's face. And strangely, I did not need one. The most important thing that had happened in that room had already happened before Paige stood up. My ownership was protected. My support had stopped. My access had changed. My name had been corrected. That evening did not create my freedom. It only revealed what happened when the old system tried to run without me. Paige called 43 minutes later. "You watched?" "Part of it. Mom says I humiliated her." "You said no. That's your response?" "Yes. She said I blindsided her in front of employees." "Did you know the guarantee was coming?" "No." "Then who blindsided who?" Paige made a small sound that might have been a laugh. "I feel awful." "I know. Is that what it feels like?" "What?" Saying no, I looked at the dark window across from me. At first, pretty terrible. That's encouraging. It gets less dramatic. "You've had, what, 2 weeks of practice?" "Apparently I'm gifted." That actually made her laugh. Then her voice changed. Aunt Joan came up to me afterward. "What did she say?" "That I should have asked questions sooner." "Anything else?" "She said she should have said something years ago." My phone buzzed while Paige was still talking. A message from Joan. "I should have said something years ago. I'm sorry." Same sentence. 2 sources. I did not need more. My reply to Joan was short. "You can say something next time." No absolution. No punishment. Just a future responsibility that belonged to her. Paige went quiet on the phone. Then she said, "I'm telling them." My fingers tightened around the phone. "What?" "That you're alive." For weeks, I had controlled that information because I needed room to recover and act before anyone could surround me with explanations, pressure, or papers. That work was done. Not all of it. Enough. Okay. You're okay with that? Yes. Where are you? I'm not giving them that yet. What should I say? Tell them I'm safe. That's it? Tell them I'm recovering. Don't give them my address or the rehab facility. They know your house. They know an address. That doesn't mean the door opens. Paige exhaled. Right. That single word told me she understood more than she had a week earlier. After the call, I sat in the quiet for a long time. The secret had served its purpose. If my entire plan still depended on my parents believing I was dead, then I had not really rebuilt anything. Privacy had given me time. It was not supposed to become another cage. The next morning, after medical clearance and a long list of instructions, I returned to my townhouse for good. Not healed. Not finished. Home. My overnight bag sat beside the stairs. I left it there. No need to prove anything by carrying it up immediately. Coffee was brewing when the doorbell camera notification appeared. Movement at front door. My mother filled the screen. Dad stood a few feet behind her. For a moment, neither moved. Then Elaine reached into her purse. The emergency key. I watched her put it into the lock. It did not turn. She tried again. Then the keypad. Old code. Red light. Again. Red. The doorbell rang. My pulse jumped so hard I could feel it in my injured shoulder. The phone rang next. Mom. I did not answer. Another doorbell. Then a text. Paige told us. Open the door. My thumb hovered over the screen. The old rules were all inside those 4 words. We know. We came. Open. No question. No permission. No acknowledgement that the house belonged to me. I typed carefully. I'm alive. I'm recovering. Any necessary communication can be in writing. Her reply came almost immediately. Open this door. The bell rang again. I stood in the hallway looking at the front door. For 25 years, someone in that house had always decided what being a good daughter required next. Answer. Pay. Fix. Carry. Explain. Open. My coffee machine beeped from the kitchen. I turned away from the door and walked toward it instead. The voicemail had arrived on my phone at 12:11, but the details screen showed Dad had left it at 9:12. That explained the impossible instruction to be at the office by 10. It did not explain why he expected a major financing transaction to close at 2, when one of the owners whose consent he apparently needed had not even seen the full package. Before leaving my office, I saved the voicemail to a folder on my personal drive and emailed myself the photograph of the blue tab from dinner. Neither action felt dramatic. That was the point. A good record was usually boring, right up until someone needed to explain why their version of events did not match it. Morgan Storage's flagship property sat 15 minutes from my office, behind a strip mall and across from a tire shop. Dad had renovated the front building years ago, with brick veneer, black awnings, and a polished aluminum sign that made rows of roll-up storage doors look more important than they were. The brass key turned in the side entrance at 12:38. Marlene, the office manager, looked up from behind the reception counter. "Oh, good," she said. "Your dad said you were coming. He was right about one thing today." Her smile faltered. Dad stepped out of his office before she could answer. Mom followed him. Gloria Morgan had never worked a regular schedule at the company, but she appeared whenever Dad wanted a business decision to feel like a family obligation. "There she is," he said. "My contract girl finally showed up." Marlene glanced at me, then at her monitor. 8 years earlier, that phrase would have made me straighten my shoulders. My contract girl. As if my father had claimed my competence because he appreciated it. Now it landed differently. "Which section of the operating agreement makes my approval necessary?" I asked. Dad stopped halfway back to his office. "We have less than 2 hours. Then a section number should be faster than a speech." Mom folded her arms. "Tessa, nobody has time for this tone." "Good. I'm asking for a document." Dad walked into his office. I followed. A thick closing packet waited on the conference table. Yellow tabs marked signature pages. The blue tabs were gone. That detail registered before I sat down. So did the absence of schedules. A financing packet without schedules was like a lease proposal without rent. You could admire the formatting all afternoon and still not know what you were agreeing to. Dad tapped the chair beside him. Sit, we'll walk through the material points. Send me the complete package. This is the package. No, it isn't. His jaw moved once. How would you know? No debt schedule, no updated collateral list, no member authorization exhibit, no succession attachment, even though yesterday's consent page referred to related financing actions. Mom lowered herself into the chair across from me. This is why everything takes 3 times longer with you. Dad opened the packet. You've signed financing documents before. Then this one should survive being read. For several seconds, the only sound in the room was the low rattle of the air conditioning vent. Dad finally turned a few pages toward me. Here, lender checklist. My eyes moved down the page. Entity documents, insurance certificates, property reports, member approvals. Then one line near the bottom stopped me. Succession continuity Mason Morgan. The room seemed to narrow around those 3 words. Nothing in the line explained what Mason's role was. Nothing said heir. Nothing said adoption. It simply placed my 12-year-old nephew inside a lender checklist. Why is Mason named here? Mom answered first. Because this company needs a future. That isn't what I asked. Dad reached for the page. My hand stayed on it. Why does the lender's checklist name Mason? Continuity planning. What planning? We've already discussed this. No. Yesterday you discussed sending Daniel away and putting Mason in front of me as a replacement. You did not explain why Mason's name appears in a financing file. Dad's face hardened. Do you want this company to survive or not? That was another Morgan trick. Ask a specific question and receive a moral test. The lender checklist went into my notes. Not physically. The original stayed on his table. I wrote the exact wording and page reference in the notebook I carried for work. Dad watched my pen. You're taking notes now? I always take notes. Not with me. That was true. It bothered me more than I wanted it to. For years, I had treated doing business with my father as something exempt from the habits that made me good at my actual job. No written scope. No billing. No confirmation email. No clean separation between favor and obligation. Dad had never ordered me to do that. He had simply benefited every time I chose it. My phone vibrated. A text from him, sent while he sat 3 feet away. Need you to review Dayton lease before you leave. The absurdity almost made me smile. He was asking me to approve a transaction I did not understand while assigning me unrelated work in the same breath. That pattern was older than the financing package. The first time I reviewed a Morgan storage lease for free, Daniel had been a toddler. A vendor had changed a renewal date in an amendment. Dad called on a Saturday morning and told me it would take 15 minutes. 3 hours later, I was sitting on my living room floor with a laptop balanced on the coffee table while Daniel built a tower against my knee. Every time he added a block, I said, "1 more minute, buddy." The tower fell twice. Dad never asked what the work cost me. When I mentioned sending an invoice jokingly, he laughed. Family doesn't invoice family. Years later, a facility renewal nearly collapsed because someone had missed a notice window. That one took an entire weekend. On Monday, Brooke arrived at the office with 6 pizzas. Morgan Storage posted a photo of her, surrounded by employees. Brooke always takes care of our people. No one photographed the spreadsheet on my kitchen table. Then there had been a call at 10:40 one night over an indemnity clause. Dad wanted a quick read. The next morning, during a conversation with Uncle Peter that I overheard in the office, Dad said, "I handled the indemnity issue. At the time, I had told myself credit did not matter. That competent people did not need applause. That being indispensable was better than being visible." Sitting in the conference room now, the old arithmetic looked less flattering. Brooke gave them pizza. I gave them weekends. Only one of those things came with photographs. Dad pushed a pen toward me. "Can we focus?" "Yes. Send me the missing schedules. They're internal." "So am I, apparently. You just called me your contract girl." Mom gave me a warning look. "Tessa." Dad pulled the pen back. You have an ownership interest. That doesn't mean you run the company. I didn't say it did. Then stop acting like it. There it was. Useful enough to sign, not powerful enough to ask. The distinction was beginning to look like the most important clause in the room. No signature happened that afternoon. A little after 1, Dad said the closing would have to be pushed while administrative items were completed. He did not say my missing consent caused the delay. I did not claim that it had. The only thing I knew for certain was that I had not signed and the transaction had not closed at 2. That was enough. Brooke texted while I was driving back toward my office. Can we talk without Mom and Dad? We met the next morning at a coffee shop halfway between our houses. She had Mason with his father that weekend. Daniel was still with Chris. For once, there were no children in the room, while adults discussed their futures. Brooke wrapped both hands around a paper cup. You made Dad postpone everything. Did he tell you that? He said you refused to cooperate. That's not the same sentence. Her mouth tightened. You know what I mean. I know exactly what you said. Brooke leaned back. This is what he means when he says you turn everything into a contract negotiation. Yesterday involved a contract. This isn't only about the company. Then tell me what it's about. She looked toward the window. Traffic crawled past on wet pavement. Dad thinks you've always resented Mason. The words landed so strangely that I almost asked her to repeat them. Why? Because he looks like a Morgan. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Not a happy one. What does that even mean? You know what it means. No, Brooke. I actually don't. She picked at the cardboard sleeve around her cup. Daniel has Chris. He has Chris's name. Chris's side of the family. Dad says you've been trying to force Daniel into a place that was supposed to stay with the Morgans. The coffee in my mouth suddenly tasted burned. Did Dad tell you I asked for Daniel to inherit Morgan Storage? Brooke hesitated. He said you've been difficult about succession. That wasn't my question. No, he didn't say you specifically asked. Did he show you the succession plan? Another pause. I know the plan. Have you seen the document? He explained it. That answer did more than an accusation could have. What does Mason inherit? The company. When? She stared at me. What do you mean, when? Next year? When Dad retires? At 18? At 30? On Dad's death? Does Brooke Morgan receive voting rights? Does Mason receive units? Is there a trust? Who manages it? Her face changed with each question. Not into understanding. Into irritation. You're doing it again. Doing what? Trying to make me feel stupid because I don't spend my life reading fine print. I'm asking whether you saw what you're defending. Brooke pushed her cup away. Dad said you were going to do this. That sentence interested me more than I let show. What did he say I would do? Make everything sound suspicious. Act like he's trying to steal something. Turn me against him, because you can't stand that Mason is the one he trusts with the future. There were a dozen answers available. Most of them would have felt good for 10 seconds. Instead, one question mattered. Did he tell you why Mason's name is in a lender checklist? Brooke went still. What lender checklist? There it was. Not proof of innocence. Not proof of conspiracy. Just a gap. And gaps mattered. She had been told Mason would inherit the company. I had been told Mason needed to replace Daniel in our branch of the family. The lender had been told something involving succession continuity. Those statements might eventually fit together. They did not fit yet. I'm not asking you to believe me, I said. Ask Dad for the full succession document. Brooke stood. You really think you're the only person in this family who understands anything? No. My coffee sat untouched between us. I think I'm the only one at this table asking to read what we're being told is already decided. She left without saying goodbye. That afternoon, the brass key sat beside my laptop while I opened the oldest clean copy of the Morgan Storage operating agreement in my files. Grandma's estate attorney had sent it to me years earlier when my ownership interest transferred. I had read the sections about distributions. I had checked transfer restrictions. At the time, the rest had seemed academic. Dad managed the company. My interest was passive, or so I had allowed myself to believe. The ownership schedule was simple. Dad held 40%, Mom held 20%, I held 15%. Uncle Peter held 15. Brooke held 10. Then came the approval provisions. Ordinary operations belonged to the managing member. Major transactions did not. A refinancing involving substantially all company collateral required approval from owners holding at least 75%. So did a sale of substantially all assets or a transfer that changed control. I wrote the percentages on a legal pad. Dad plus mom plus Brooke. 40, 20, 10, 70, 5 short. My 15 could take them to 85. Peter's 15 could do the same. Neither of us controlled the company. Either of us could supply what Dad's usual voting bloc lacked. That was why the blue tab had been at dinner. Not because I ran Morgan's storage. Because Dad needed one more owner. The discovery did not feel like power. It felt like finally noticing where the load-bearing wall was, after years of being told I was furniture. Before calling anyone, I reread the provision twice. Then a third time. No dramatic interpretation. No assumptions. The wording said what it said. A call to Elena came next. Commercial lending, Elena Ruiz. Hi, Elena. Tessa Morgan. There was a slight pause. Miss Morgan. I received your email. Thank you. I have 2 narrow questions. All right. Has any approval from me been verified directly with me? No. Clear. Clean. My pen moved across the page. Second question. Without discussing the lender's internal decision-making, if a transaction requires member authorization under the borrower's governing documents, would proper authorization need to be completed before closing? Yes, she said. We would need the required authorization in the closing file. That's all I needed. Elena sounded almost surprised. Okay. Thank you. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. She had not told me to oppose the transaction. She had not told me Dad had done anything improper. What she gave me was narrower and more useful. My consent had not been verified. Required authorization had to exist. The rest was mine to figure out. Monday morning brought the next piece. At 9:17, an email from Dad appeared in my inbox. Recipients included Mom, Brooke, Peter, Marlene, and me. All family approvals are substantially complete. Remaining items are administrative. We expect to proceed promptly once documentation is finalized. The wording was careful. Too careful. He had not written that every approval was signed. He had not written that I had consented. But after my email to Elena, after the meeting, after my refusal to sign, he was still presenting the approvals as essentially finished. A counterparty could hide a lot inside the word substantially. So could a parent. No reply went out. Instead, I saved the email in the folder I had created Friday. Versiones. Then I opened the attachments. One file was labeled Succession Plan, Family, V3. Farther down the attachment index was a reference to Succession Plan, Lender, V3. My mouse stopped. Same plan name. Same revision number. Different audience. Before opening either one, Dad sent another message. Since you're reviewing things anyway, take a look at the date and lease. Renewal clause needs cleanup. The old reflex arrived immediately. Open it. Fix it. Keep everyone moving. My cursor even drifted toward the attachment. Then Daniel's question from the car came back to me. Are you giving me away? Not because a lease had anything to do with him. Because I finally saw how often something belonging to Morgan Storage had been allowed to come first, simply because Dad said it was urgent. The Dayton lease stayed unopened. A reply took less than a minute. That lease is not part of the owner materials I requested. Please route operational contract review through company counsel or paid staff. The message looked almost rude on my screen. Then I reread it. There was no insult, no threat, no accusation. Just a job I was no longer volunteering to perform. Dad answered 3 minutes later. Unbelievable. That was all. At 6, my phone went on Do Not Disturb. Daniel came home from Chris's 20 minutes later carrying his backpack and complaining that his father put mushrooms in spaghetti sauce on purpose. For the first time in days, the complaint made me smile. Your father has always had questionable judgment. Can we order pizza? We have food. That's not an answer. It's the answer. He dropped his backpack by the stairs. My laptop sat closed on the kitchen counter. Dad's unread messages could wait behind the dark screen. Daniel looked at it, Then, at me, "You don't have to work for Grandpa tonight?" The question was casual. That made it worse. Apparently, my 10-year-old had already learned that Grandpa's needs could reach into our kitchen after business hours. "Not tonight." A small nod. "Okay." He opened the refrigerator. Nothing dramatic happened. No music swelled. No one congratulated me for choosing dinner with my own son over an unpaid lease review. We made grilled cheese and tomato soup. Daniel told me about a kid in his class who had tried to convince the teacher that a missing homework sheet had been lost to weather conditions. Around 7:30, he went upstairs to shower. Only then did I open the laptop again. Not the date and lease. The two succession plan references. Same title. Same revision. Different destination. There were only two possibilities that interested me. Either the distinction was harmless and explainable, or somebody expected different people to read different versions of the same future. My folder was already open. I saved both references inside it. Same title. Same revision number. Different audience. I knew enough about contracts to know that was rarely where the difference stopped. The two files sat side by side on my screen until almost midnight. Same title. Same revision label. Different future. The first document was the one Dad had circulated to the family. Succession plan. Family. V3. Its language was broad, almost sentimental by business document standards. It referred to preserving multi-generational ownership and transitioning stewardship to the next Morgan generation. Mason's name appeared more than once. Brooks did too. There were references to mentorship, continuity, and future representation. If that were the only version I had seen, I might have understood why Brooke believed her son was being prepared to inherit the company. Then, I opened the lender version. The first few pages looked nearly identical. Same formatting, same headings, same effective date language. The difference appeared under management control. Dad remained managing member through the transition. Removal required a supermajority. Material operating decisions remained under his authority. Even after ownership interests shifted over time, management control did not automatically shift with them. Mason was not being handed a company. His name was being used to prove that a Morgan would still exist on the other side of the financing. Dad stayed in charge. I scrolled back to the family version, then forward again. The revision dates matched. The document labels matched. The control provisions did not. That didn't prove why the two versions existed. It did prove that Brooke and the lender were being shown different pictures of the same future. Near the end of the lender version, one line caught my eye. Alternative disposition analysis, see Exhibit D. There was no Exhibit D attached. The family version did not mention alternative disposition at all. I searched both files. One hit in the lender version. Chester. None in the family copy. Alternative disposition. In commercial real estate, that phrase could mean several things. Sale, transfer, restructure. Sometimes it was just a required analysis. Sometimes it was the door everyone hoped nobody opened. My cursor hovered over the words. Dad had spent a week insisting refinance was the only responsible way to preserve Morgan storage. The document in front of me suggested someone had considered another path. That was the first thing I wanted the next morning. Not Dad's explanation. Not Mom's interpretation. The record. Brooke agreed to meet me after lunch at a bakery near her house. She arrived 7 minutes late and didn't apologize. Neither did I mention it. A paper bag from the bakery sat between us, unopened. "I have 20 minutes, she said. "That's enough." Her eyes narrowed when I turned my laptop around. "What is this?" "The succession plan Dad sent the family." "I know what that is. And this is the version referenced in the lender materials." Brooke looked from one tab to the other. "They're both version 3. "Yes." "So?" "Read the management section." She did. Her eyes moved slowly at first, then faster. The hand holding her coffee went still. After about a minute, she pushed the laptop back toward me. "Maybe the lender needs different language." "Maybe." That answer seemed to irritate her more than if I had argued. "You don't think so?" "I think two people should be able to read two documents with the same revision number and understand why they're different." "That doesn't mean Dad lied." "I didn't say he did." "You're implying it." "No. I'm showing you paper." Brooke folded her arms. "What exactly do you want me to do?" Ask him why your version gives you a future voice, and the lender version keeps management control with him. Her mouth tightened. You think I'm stupid? I think you were told Mason would inherit the company. He will. Then ask when. She looked away. Why are you so obsessed with control? That question almost made me laugh. Instead, I closed the laptop. I'm not asking you to trust me. Good. Ask Dad. She stood. You always do this. You turn things into wording and clauses until nobody remembers what the actual issue was. The actual issue was Daniel being told he had to go so Mason could inherit everything. Her expression changed for half a second. Not guilt. Not agreement. Just discomfort. Then she picked up her purse. Mason didn't ask for any of this. No, I said. He didn't. That was something we agreed on. It just wasn't enough yet. Brooke left. The paper bag remained on the table. She had bought 2 pastries. I took mine home to Daniel. Mom showed up that evening without calling. The doorbell rang while Daniel was upstairs finishing homework. When I opened the door, she stood on the porch holding her car keys and wearing the expression she used before difficult conversations. Not angry. Wounded. It was one of her more effective expressions. Can I come in? For a few minutes. She stepped past me. Is Daniel here? Upstairs. I'd like to see him. No. Mom turned. Tessa. He said he doesn't want to see either of you right now. He's 10. Yes. You're letting a 10-year-old decide this. I'm listening to him. Her lips pressed together. We moved into the kitchen. The laptop was still on the counter, closed. Dad's title offer did not exist yet. Northline did not exist yet, at least not to me. At that moment, all I had were 2 versions and a missing exhibit. Mom looked around. You've made this into something much bigger than it needed to be. Mom, you pointed at my son and said he had to go. We were talking about options. You called a residential placement program an orphanage in front of him. That was your father. You didn't correct him. She took a breath through her nose. You want to know why your father gets so rigid about this company? The question surprised me enough that I waited. Mom pulled out a kitchen chair but didn't sit. When he was 23, his father still had the hardware business. I knew that much. The old Morgan hardware store had been gone before I was born. Dad rarely talked about it except to say his father had made weak decisions. Mom continued. Your grandfather got into debt. His brothers wanted out. They sold their interests to people outside the family. How do you know this? Because Leonard has told me the story 100 times. That source mattered. She wasn't describing a private scene she had somehow witnessed decades earlier. She was telling me the story Dad had repeated to her. The business kept operating, she said. Different owners, different name. Your father drove past the building after they changed the sign. Her voice softened. He told me it was worse than seeing the doors locked. The store was still there, but Morgan was gone. Something in my chest shifted. Not forgiveness. Context. Dad's obsession with the name had always seemed inflated to me. A preference hardened into doctrine. Now I could see where the first brick might have been laid. Mom mistook my quiet for progress. That's why he fights so hard to keep this together. You think it's about control because that's how you look at everything now. To him, it's survival. Survival of what? The family. No. The name. Mom's face changed. That's unfair. Is it? You know what that company means to him. I know what Daniel means to me. This doesn't have to be either or. It became either or when you told my son he should leave so Mason could take his place. We never said take his place. I stared at her. She looked down. That was enough. A few seconds passed before she spoke again. Your father watched strangers take his family's name off a building. The sentence was clearly meant to explain everything. Maybe once it would have. Now it explained only one thing. Fear. Then he learned fear, I said. That doesn't give him Daniel. Mom's eyes flashed. You're determined to punish him. No. Then, what do you call all of this? Reading. Her mouth opened. I kept going. Reading what he wants signed. Reading what Brooke was told. Reading what the lender was shown. You're treating your father like an adversary. No, I'm treating documents like documents. She reached for her purse. At the doorway, she stopped. Families survive because people protect what carries the family name. There it was again. Not exactly Dad's wording. Close enough. A doctrine polished by repetition. After she left, Daniel came halfway down the stairs. Is she gone? Yes. He took the rest of the steps. Did she ask to see me? Yes. What did you say? No. He nodded once. Thanks. One word. Small. Heavy. For years I had thought loyalty meant keeping everyone at the table. That night it meant respecting the person who had asked not to sit there. 2 days later, Marlene sent the supporting schedules I had requested. No fanfare. No commentary. Just a secure link and a note. These are the owner materials currently available for the financing review. The numbers were not catastrophic. That mattered. 2 facilities were strong. 2 were steady. 2 carried too much debt relative to their recent performance. Expansion costs had eaten more cash than Dad liked to admit in casual conversations. Deferred maintenance showed up in ways polished lobby photos did not. Morgan's storage was not dying. It was stretched. The proposed refinance would keep all 6 properties together, extend the runway, and preserve Dad's operating structure. That was one option. It was not automatically the only one. Uncle Peter joined the owner call Thursday afternoon. He sounded bored until distributions came up. What happens to quarterly distributions if this closes? He asked. The company accountant explained that cash available for distributions would likely be tighter during the first period after refinance. Peter Seahill. How much tighter? A range followed. No one raised questions about Mason. No one asked why 2 succession plans existed. That told me Peter had not been shown what I had, or if he had not cared enough to compare. Neither possibility made him an ally. Near the end of the call, Marlene shared a summary page. One line sat under strategic alternatives. Prior third-party indication declined by management. My pen stopped. Can we go back 1 page? I asked. The screen moved backward. What was the third-party indication? Dad answered immediately. Not relevant. It's in the owner materials. It went nowhere. Was it an offer? No. And Loie? No answer. Peter spoke for the first time in several minutes. What kind of third party? Dad exhaled. Someone sniffing around. We decided it wasn't in the company's interest. We. The word irritated me. Which owners reviewed it? Tessa, Dad said. We are discussing the refinance in front of us. That told me what he wanted to discuss. It did not tell me what had existed before it. The line went into my notebook. So did his wording. Someone sniffing around. Not relevant. Went nowhere. 3 phrases. No document yet. The same evening, Dad called and asked me to come to the flagship office after hours. For once, there was no packet waiting when I entered. Only 1 sheet of paper. Dad stood by the window overlooking the rows of storage buildings. You've made your point, he said. I wasn't aware you agreed with it. I agree you want recognition. The sentence caught me off guard. Dad turned. You've done more for this company than Brooke knows. My body reacted before my mind did. A tightening behind my ribs. Not pain exactly. Something older, he continued. You've kept us out of bad leases. You've caught things other people missed. You've shown up every time I called. There it was. The sentence I had wanted for years. Not you're practical. Not we depend on you. An actual acknowledgement. Part of me hated how quickly it worked. He held out the paper. At the top, Executive Vice President Family Operations. I read the title twice. Dad's voice softened. You've earned a real place here. The room blurred at the edges for 1 embarrassing second. That title should not have mattered. My actual career mattered. My work mattered. Daniel mattered. Still, somewhere inside me was the 33-year-old woman eating leftover pasta under a Facebook photograph of Brooke labeled The Next Generation. Dad placed the brass key on the desk. You won't have to wonder whether you belong here anymore. What changes? Your title. What authority comes with it? His expression cooled slightly. We'll work that out. Signature authority? Within reason. Independent approval? Tessa, this is exactly what I mean. I'm trying to give you something. What do you need me to give you? The warmth disappeared. Sign the refinance. There it was. Anything else? Stop confusing Brooke. I showed her 2 documents. You're making her question a plan she was comfortable with. She hadn't read it. She trusted me. Dad stepped closer to the desk. Mason gives this company continuity. You give it competence. Brooke gives it visibility. Everybody has a role. And Daniel, his face went still. That's not what we're discussing. It was exactly what we were discussing. Dad picked up the title letter and held it out again. Take this home. Think about it. I did. That surprised even me. The paper rode on the passenger seat all the way home. At one red light, I almost laughed at myself. 41 years old. A successful career. A son who needed me to have a spine. And one line under my name still had the power to make me imagine Christmas dinners where Dad introduced me differently. At home, Daniel was doing math at the kitchen table. I set the title letter beside my laptop. "What's that?" he asked. "Something Grandpa offered me." "A job?" "Sort of. Do you want it?" The question was so clean that it hurt. "I don't know." Daniel went back to his worksheet. No advice. No guilt. No doctrine. Just permission not to know yet. I opened the document. This time, the title did not impress me first. The authority section did. There wasn't one. Responsibilities were broad. Coordination. Review. Operational support. Contract oversight. Reporting. Final approval remained with the managing member. Dad. The title gave me visibility. The structure kept me where I had always been. Useful. Responsible. Dependent on his permission. Mason was being offered the name heir. I was being offered executive vice president. Dad kept control of both titles. The pattern was almost elegant. Once I saw it, wanting the title became harder. Not painless. Harder. At 6:58, I opened a new email. The subject line read, "Request for owner records alternative disposition analysis." The body was simple. I requested the materials underlying the prior third-party indication referenced in the financing summary, including any LOI, valuation, correspondence, and management response available to owners. No accusation. No theory. Just the missing exhibit. Send. The clock changed to 7. My hand remained on the laptop. Then Daniel looked up. "Are you done?" Dad's title letter sat beside the brass key. For years, Morgan Storage had trained me to believe every unanswered question was an emergency. Every lease needed tonight. Every call mattered more than dinner. Every problem proved why they needed me. The laptop closed. "For tonight, yes." Daniel smiled. "Movie? Your turn to pick. That means you can't complain. I retain limited complaint rights." He laughed. An hour later, we were on the couch arguing over popcorn, while my phone buzzed twice on the kitchen counter. I didn't check it. The records request could wait until morning. Morgan Storage could wait until morning. That realization felt almost as important as whatever was hiding behind Exhibit D. For the first time in years, I had stopped measuring my place in that company by how quickly I answered when my father called. Now I wanted to know what he had already refused when nobody else was looking, and why he had refused it. The reply to my records request arrived Tuesday morning at 8:16. Marlene's message contained a secure link and one sentence. "These are the materials maintained in the company archive relating to the prior third-party indication referenced in the financing summary." No interpretation. No warning. No explanation from Dad. Exactly what I had asked for. The first file was dated almost 11 months earlier. Northline Storage Group, non-binding letter of intent. My coffee stayed untouched beside the keyboard. This was not someone sniffing around, as Dad had described it. Northline had proposed acquiring all 6 Morgan Storage properties. The next folder contained site tour schedules. 3 properties had already been visited. There were occupancy reports, environmental questionnaires, preliminary title requests, operating statements, and follow-up questions about deferred maintenance. The dates stretched across almost 7 weeks. Someone did not spend 7 weeks exchanging that much information because they wandered past the building and became curious. Northline had been inside the process. Deep inside it, a revised pricing email appeared near the end of the correspondence. Their acquisitions director, Dana Reed, had asked whether a modest increase in price would keep negotiations alive. Dad's response did not mention price. He asked whether the Morgan Storage name could remain on the properties after closing. Dana answered that Northline's operating model required rebranding. Dad's next question asked whether he could remain as managing operator with authority over all 6 locations. Northline offered a short transition period, not permanent management. Another message followed from Dad. Without continuity of name and operating leadership, this transaction does not serve the long-term interests of Morgan Storage. Then the internal summary. One sentence had been typed beneath the proposal status. Declined destroys family continuity. I leaned back. For 3 weeks, Dad had presented the refinance as if reality itself had narrowed to one road. Keep all 6 properties. Keep the structure. Keep the debt manageable. Keep the Morgans in control. Except someone had already shown him another road. It paid off the existing debt based on the numbers in the old proposal. It created liquidity for the owners. It included a transition plan for on-site employees. And Dad had stopped walking down that road when he learned the signs would change and his authority would end. That did not mean Northline's old proposal was still available. 11 months could change occupancy, interest rates, repairs, valuations, buyer appetite. A stale letter was not a deal, so I did not call Brooke. I did not call Peter. And I definitely did not call Dad. First, I needed to know whether Northline was history or an option. Dana Reed's contact information was still in the correspondence. At 10:30, after finishing an actual lease negotiation for my actual employer, I called her. Dana Reed. Miss Reed, my name is Tessa Morgan. I'm an owner in Morgan Storage Holdings. A pause followed. I know the name. That makes one of us. Until this week, I didn't know yours. She gave a short laugh. What can I do for you? I'm reviewing owner records related to your prior letter of intent. I'm not calling to negotiate a sale. Understood. One question. If ownership formally requested an updated indication, would Northline consider reopening its review? Dana did not answer immediately. We'd have to look at current operating numbers. Of course. Occupancy, capital needs, debt, title, everything would need refreshing. Understood. And I'm not promising the old number. I'm not asking you to. Another pause. Then she said, yes. If ownership formally wanted to reopen the conversation, we'd consider updated diligence. Would you be willing to confirm that by email? Yes. Thank you. That was it. No secret promise. No rescue. No buyer waiting outside with a suitcase full of money. Just a blocked path that might still exist if the people who actually owned the company were allowed to see it. Dana's email arrived 20 minutes later. I saved it to the same folder as the old letter of intent. Then I closed the files and went back to work. That choice was becoming important. A month earlier, Morgan Storage would have swallowed the rest of my day. Now it got the hour I had chosen to give it. Dad called at 5:12. The screen lit up while I was shutting down my office computer. I let it ring. A text followed. Need you at the Dayton property tonight. Lease issue. Another appeared before I reached the elevator. This is time sensitive. At 6, Daniel and I were sitting in a booth at a diner near his baseball field. He was still wearing his practice jersey and had a streak of dirt down one forearm. My phone remained face down beside my purse. You're not going? He asked. Going where? To Grandpa's thing. No. Daniel poured too much syrup over his pancakes. You always go. I used to. He considered that while cutting one pancake into pieces too small to need cutting. Then he asked, if Grandpa's company is family, does that mean I have to work there someday? My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Why would you think that? He talks like everybody has a job. That was painfully accurate. What job does he say you have? Daniel shrugged. I don't know. He says Mason understands what it means to be a Morgan. The sentence sat between us. Not because it was new. Because I could finally hear what it taught. Belonging was a position. A surname was an assignment. An inheritance was not something you received. It was something you were expected to become worthy of carrying. For years, I had participated in a softer version of the same idea. Maybe one day this will be yours. I had said it to Daniel about the company more than once. Never as a threat. Never as an obligation. But children did not need adults to mean harm for them to inherit it. You don't have to work there, I said. Ever? Ever. What if I want to? Then you can decide when you're old enough to know what you're choosing. He ate another piece of pancake. What do you want me to do? The question hit harder. A month earlier, I might have answered with something polished. College. A good career. Be responsible. Instead, the truth was simpler. I'd rather leave you choices than a job you never asked for. Daniel looked relieved in a way that made me ashamed I had never said it before. Can one of my choices be not eating the eggs? No, that doesn't sound like choices. Breakfast has limited democracy. He grinned. My phone buzzed again. Dad. I did not turn it over. The Dayton lease survived the evening without me. So did Morgan Storage. The next afternoon, Brooke agreed to meet at my house. She stood just inside the kitchen instead of sitting. What is this about? Mason. That got her attention. The laptop was already open. I showed her the lender succession language first. Then the section keeping Dad in management control. Then Northline's old letter. Brooke read the opening page twice. What is Northline? A regional storage operator. They wanted to buy everything? They made a non-binding proposal. Her eyes moved to the price range. That's it? That was almost a year ago. Brooke looked at me. Dad said people were trying to buy us cheap. Did he show you the proposal? He showed me something. What? I don't remember. Did it say they'd pay off the debt? I said I don't remember. Her voice sharpened. So this is your solution? Sell everything? No. It looks like it. My position is that owners should know there was another option before anybody tells us refinance is the only option. And Mason gets what? The question came quickly enough that I knew exactly where her fear lived. Brooke. No. Answer me. You're the one who keeps saying documents matter. What does Mason get if strangers buy the company? He gets to be 12. She stared at me. That's cute. It isn't supposed to be. You want to take away the only thing Dad is trying to leave him. No. I want Mason out of a financing structure he cannot understand and didn't choose. Brooke's face tightened. You don't get to decide what's good for my son. You're right. That stopped her. I turned the laptop back toward myself. You do. She picked up her purse. Then stop acting like this is about protecting everybody. I'm protecting Daniel. I'm protecting my ownership rights. And I'm making sure the same document gets shown to people who are being asked to vote on the same transaction. That's not the same as caring what happens to Mason. No. The answer hurt to give. But it was honest. I care about him. That doesn't make me his mother. Brooke left without another word. For the next 4 hours, nothing happened. Then, at 9:23, my phone vibrated. A message from her. No greeting. Just a photograph. A page from a Northline presentation. I enlarged it. The top section matched the material in the archive. The bottom did not. Brooke's copy ended before the sections labeled brand integration, management transition, and owner liquidity. Another text appeared. This is what Dad showed me. Then, he told me they were trying to buy us cheap. No apology. No admission that I had been right. A final message followed. Why would he cut this part off? My thumb rested above the keyboard. There were dozens of answers I could have typed. Because he was controlling you. Because he lied. Because I told you so. None of those were facts I could prove from one photograph. So I wrote, I don't know. Ask him. Keep the original page if you still have it. Brooke answered. I will. That was all. It was enough. Not because she had chosen me. She hadn't. She was doing what a mother should have done from the beginning. She was asking what someone intended to do with her son. The following morning, I stopped gathering and started acting. The operating agreement sat open beside my notebook. Dad, Mom, and Brooke controlled 70%. Major financing needed 75%. Northline's old proposal existed. The buyer had confirmed that an updated review was possible. Brooke possessed a version of the presentation that omitted sections affecting management and branding. My non-consent was already time-stamped. Waiting longer would not make the facts cleaner. It would only give Dad more time to define them first. The email I sent went to Dad, Mom, Brooke, Peter, and Marlene. It was short. I confirmed that I did not consent to the current refinancing structure. Then I requested that any owner meeting concerning a major transaction include the complete prior Northline materials, any updated indication Northline chose to provide, and a comparative summary showing debt payoff, expected owner proceeds, major employee transition terms, and management consequences under each option. There was no demand that anyone sell, no accusation, no claim that Northline was better before current numbers were refreshed. My final paragraph took the longest. I am willing to evaluate a sale or other clean disposition if the terms appropriately address existing debt, owner equity, reasonable employee transition protections, and do not use Daniel or Mason as conditions, succession devices, or leverage in obtaining member approval. Read once. Read twice. Send. The cursor disappeared. Nothing exploded. At 11:14, Peter replied to everyone, "I want the comparison before I vote on anything." That sentence mattered because Peter had not taken my side. He had taken the side of seeing the numbers. Good. Brooke replied 20 minutes later. Same. Full documents. Dad called immediately. This time I answered. What did you do? He asked. Sent an email. You contacted Northline? Yes. You had no authority to reopen negotiations. I didn't reopen negotiations. You had no right. I asked whether they would consider updated diligence if ownership requested it. His breathing came through the phone. You're going around me. I'm an owner reviewing an alternative referenced in owner materials. That deal is dead. Then updated diligence will show that. You don't understand what they'll do. What will they do? They'll cut jobs, strip the name, fold everything into some corporate chain, then put that in the comparison. You think this is a spreadsheet? No, I think you're asking for my vote. A pause. When Dad spoke again, his voice was lower. Daniel will grow up knowing his mother sold his inheritance. There it was, the old lever. Different wording, same pressure point. Daniel is not part of this conversation. He is if you destroy what would have gone to him. I will discuss Morgan Storage as an owner. I will discuss Daniel as his mother. Those are separate conversations now. Tessa. If you combine them again, I end the call. You don't get to make rules for me. No. My hand tightened around the phone. I make them for access to me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Dad said, You've changed. Maybe he meant it as criticism. It landed like confirmation. Yes. The call ended. That evening, an owner meeting invitation appeared in my inbox. Flagship conference room. Monday, 4:30. Dad's note contained one additional line. Come prepared to decide whether you're still part of this family. I read it once. Then, forwarded the meeting details to my work calendar. Monday already held a lease negotiation at 2. Old Tessa would have moved it. New Tessa did not. Priya leaned into my doorway when she saw me updating the schedule. Need me to take the 2 o'clock? No. You sure? Yes. The answer came easily. I'll finish my work, then go deal with mine. She nodded and disappeared. Monday afternoon, the lease negotiation ended at 3:18. No one at my job knew that an hour later I would be sitting across from my father, deciding whether Morgan Storage remained Morgan Storage. That separation felt healthy. In the parking garage, I opened the passenger door and placed 2 folders on the seat. Refinance. Northline. The brass key was in the side pocket of my bag. For years, Dad had made that key feel like proof I belonged inside the building. Now I understood something simpler. The key gave me access to a door. The operating agreement gave me standing. My vote belonged to me. Those were 3 different things. Dad had chosen the flagship conference room because everyone knew the place. He knew how the long polished table felt. He knew which chair each person usually took. He knew how easily business became loyalty when Mom was sitting nearby and Brooke's future was part of the conversation. Maybe that would still work on some of them. It no longer had to work on me. The engine started. On the passenger seat, 2 versions of Morgan Storage waited in 2 folders. One kept the name. One might not. For the first time, everyone walking into that room was going to see both. The flagship conference room had 1 window, 12 leather chairs, and a photograph of my grandfather standing beside the first Morgan Storage sign. Dad always sat with that photograph behind him. I had never noticed that until Monday. Mom was already beside him when I walked in. Brooke sat 2 chairs down, her phone face up on the table. Uncle Peter had a yellow legal pad in front of him. Marlene was near the door with the company accountant, David Klein. No one greeted me. That was fine. The two folders went on the table. Refinance. Northline. Dad looked at them, and then at me. You brought props. I brought the documents we're voting around. His eyes moved to my bag. Where's the key? In my bag. Good. You may need files after this. The assumption was so familiar that for a second I almost answered the way I always had. Sure. Whatever you need. Instead, I sat down. Dad waited until everyone had settled. We've wasted enough time, he began. The refinance preserves all 6 properties, stabilizes the debt, and keeps Morgan Storage where it belongs. Peter lifted his pen. What happens to distributions? Dad glanced at David. The accountant answered. They'll likely be reduced for a period. How much? We included ranges in the comparison materials. Peter flipped to the page. Dad continued. This company survived because people understood that not every decision can be made for individual convenience. Mom nodded. Brooke did not. Dad looked directly at me. A family survives only if everyone protects what carries the family name. There was the sentence. Not hidden in a document. Not softened by Mom. His. He slid a sheet of paper across the table. The title was still there. Executive Vice President Family Operations. Mom touched the corner of it. This is everything you said you wanted. Not everything, but close enough to hurt. A place. Recognition. Dad. Saying my work counted. He set a pen beside the title letter. Sign the refinance. Take the role. We move forward. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. The old version of me would have filled the space. Explained. Defended. Made sure everyone understood I was not angry, not ungrateful, not trying to hurt anyone. Instead, the pen stayed where it was. The Northline folder opened first. I have 4 facts I want on the table before anyone votes. Dad's mouth tightened. Tessa. 4. Peter looked up. Dad leaned back. So I began. The refinance requires 75% approval under the operating agreement. No one interrupted. You, Mom, and Brooke hold 70% combined. Dad's gaze shifted to Peter. Peter kept looking at me. Second, there are 2 documents labeled Succession Plan Version 3. Brooke reached for the copies in front of her. The family copy describes Mason as the next generation heir and suggests Brooke will have future representation. The lender copy preserves Dad's management control and removal protections for years beyond the refinancing. Dad opened his mouth. Different audiences required different. Third, that stopped him. Northline did not make a casual inquiry. They signed a non-binding letter of intent. They completed preliminary diligence on 3 properties and requested documents on the others. David looked toward Dad. Marlene stared at her notes. Fourth, when Northline asked whether adjusting price would keep discussions alive, the company response focused on keeping the Morgan name and Dad's operating authority. The internal summary says the proposal was declined because it destroys family continuity. Dad pushed his chair back half an inch. That sale destroys everything I built. There it was. Not a confession. Something more useful. The truth, as he understood it. Does it destroy the business? I asked. Or your name on it? His palm flattened against the table. What is the point of building something if strangers get to put their name on it? No one gasped. No one needed to. Peter looked down at the Northline summary again. Brooke opened her copy of the lender's succession plan. Mom stared at me as if the question itself were offensive. Dad had spent weeks saying the refinance protected employees, property values, continuity, Mason, all of us. But when the alternative was placed beside it, the first thing he defended was the name. That changed the room. Not because everyone suddenly agreed with me. Because we were finally discussing the thing he was actually trying to preserve. Dad pointed at the Northline folder. That letter is nearly a year old. Yes. It is not an offer today. Correct. Then this is theater. No. It's an alternative you declined before the other owners saw the full terms. I manage the company. Ordinary operations, yes. His face hardened. This is why I never should have let you treat a minority interest like a management seat. You didn't let me have it. Grandma did. Mom cut in. Do you hear yourself? Yes. Tessa. Your father is trying to leave something behind. So am I. I looked at Brooke. Then, at the succession documents, I'm not consenting to the current refinance. Dad's eyes narrowed. That's your final answer? Yes. The word came out without effort. No apology attached. No paragraph explaining why. Dad turned toward Peter. Then Peter can approve it. Peter placed his pen on the table. Not today. Dad stared at him. Peter tapped the comparative analysis request I had circulated. I want the full numbers on both paths. There is no second path. Then it should be easy to prove. Dad's expression changed, but Peter was already reading again. Brooke spoke next. I'm not signing anything else that uses Mason's future until I see the same version everybody else sees. Mom turned toward her. Brooke, I'm not saying sell. I didn't say you were. I'm saying I want everything. Dad exhaled through his nose. You're letting your sister make you afraid of your own inheritance. Brooke looked at him. No. I'm asking why the lender's copy says you still control it when Mason is 30. The room went very still then. Not because the question was dramatic. Because it came from Brooke. Dad looked at me first. She gave you that language without explaining it. She showed me the document. Brooke's voice was sharper now. That's different. Mom reached for her hand. Brooke pulled it back to turn another page. Nothing had been repaired between us. She had not chosen me. She was doing what I had asked her to do from the beginning. Read. Dad stood. This meeting is over. It doesn't have to be, I said. He looked down at me. My position is simple. I will evaluate a clean sale if updated diligence supports it. Existing debt gets paid. Owners receive proceeds according to actual equity. Employee transition terms get reviewed. There is no side arrangement that keeps permanent control after closing. You don't get to dictate sale terms. No. I get to dictate what I will consent to. His face went red. And Daniel and Mason are not conditions of my vote. Mom whispered my name. I kept looking at Dad. No child belongs in a financing pitch. That was the last thing I said in the room. There was no vote that afternoon. That mattered. Dad had called us there to finish the refinance. We left without finishing it. The first updated Northline materials arrived 11 days later. Dana had warned me the old number might not survive. It didn't. Deferred maintenance was higher than the previous reports had shown. One facility had lost occupancy. Interest rate assumptions had changed. The updated indication came in lower. Not disastrously lower. Lower enough that Dad could say, I told you so, during the next owner call. He did. This is exactly what happens when amateurs reopen dead deals. No one answered the insult. David walked us through the comparison. The refinance kept all 6 properties and offered more upside if performance improved. It also kept the debt burden, required tighter distributions for a period, and preserved Dad's management structure. The Northline route paid off the financing, ended future upside, created taxes and transaction costs, and left owners with cash proceeds instead of the company. There was no magical option. That helped me trust it. Good choices were rarely the ones without a cost. They were the ones whose cost you understood before signing. Peter asked numbers. Brooke asked what happened to Mason's supposed future interest. Mom asked whether the company could keep its name for a transition period. I asked about employees. Northline's written response said most on-site managers and facility staff would be offered continued employment subject to normal transition review. Some duplicated administrative functions would not be retained. Not everyone was saved. That mattered too. I could not claim I had protected every job simply because the ending looked cleaner that way. The next month was filled with documents that were less exciting than anyone imagines when they hear the word acquisition. Updated occupancy, property reports, title questions, repair estimates, debt payoff figures, emails about access. Nobody burst into a conference room with a revelation. The truth had already done its dramatic work. Now came arithmetic. Morgan Storage also stopped calling me every evening. Not because Dad respected my boundary. Because I stopped answering operational questions. One Friday, Marlene forwarded a lease issue with a note. Leonard asked if you could take a quick look. My reply took 20 seconds. Please route it through the company's regular legal or leasing process. I'm not providing unpaid operational review. No guilt followed. That surprised me more than the first time I said it. Daniel noticed the difference before anyone else did. Grandpa doesn't call during dinner anymore, he said one night. He still calls. You don't answer. That too. He smiled and kept eating. A week later, Brooke called. Not texted. Called. Mason asked me if Grandpa's company is going to be his. What did you tell him? That I don't know. A pause. Then she said, he said he doesn't want it. I leaned against the kitchen counter. Okay, that's all you have to say? What do you want me to say? I don't know. Neither did I. Brooke continued. He wants to design video games. That sounds 12. She gave a tired laugh. Yeah. Nothing about the conversation turned us into sisters who suddenly understood each other. She still blamed me for reopening Northline. I still remembered how long she accepted the version of our lives that favored her. But for the first time, Mason's wishes had entered the conversation. That was enough progress for one phone call. By the second month, the choice had narrowed. Dad still wanted the refinance. Mom still supported him. If Peter joined them, their combined ownership would reach 85%, and my objection would not stop it. Peter did not join them. He sent one email to all owners. Based on the current comparison, I am not approving additional portfolio leverage. No speech, just his vote. That left the refinance at 70%. Dead without me or Peter. The sale presented a different problem. A sale of substantially all assets also needed 75%. Without Dad, the rest of us held only 60. We could block him. We could not sell around him. That was exactly how the agreement was supposed to work. For another 3 weeks, nothing closed. Dad could not force the refinance. The rest of us could not force the sale. Northline gave the company a deadline for moving forward with final diligence. Meanwhile, the existing financing maturity did not disappear because we were having a generational argument. At the final owner meeting before Northline's deadline, David put the cash outcomes on one page. Dad read it without speaking. The refinance remained possible only if either Peter or I changed our vote. Neither of us did. A piecemeal sale of weaker properties was possible, but the estimates showed it would leave the company smaller, still leveraged, and likely force additional refinancing afterward. Northline's deal ended the problem. It also ended Morgan Storage. Dad looked older that afternoon than he had a month earlier. Not defeated, tired. He closed the comparison. If I sign this, the name is gone. No one answered immediately. Mom looked at him. Brooke looked at Mason's name on a page she had brought with her, and then turned that page face down. Peter stared at the financial summary. My hands stayed in my lap. There was nothing left for me to argue. The facts were already there. Dad picked up the authorization. You'll all get your money, Mom said quietly. Leonard. He ignored her. His pen moved across the page. That signature did not make me feel victorious. It made me understand the difference between forcing someone to lose and refusing to save them from the cost of their own choices. Dad still had 40%. The sale required him. In the end, he signed because the structure he wanted could not get enough support, and the alternatives in front of him were worse. His signature completed the approval threshold. Mine did too. I signed after reading every page. The purchase agreement took another 2 months. Closing came later than anyone expected because one property had a title issue involving an old easement description. Northline's final price shifted again after updated capital estimates. No miracle rescued the numbers. Debt was paid. Transaction costs came out. Taxes existed. Owners received the rest according to their actual percentages. Dad received the largest share. He did not lose his house. He did not become poor. He did not go to jail. Neither did Mom. Brooke received her portion. Peter received his. My 15% became money in an account that did not require me to answer a Sunday night phone call. The week before transition ended, Dad asked me to come to the flagship office. For once, I went because I chose to. The furniture was already being tagged for inventory. Some Morgan Storage signs had temporary Northline covers stacked against the wall. Dad stood behind his desk with a lease open in front of him. Look at this. My purse stayed on my shoulder. What is it? Dayton. Renewal language. Of course it was Dayton. Northline has counsel. They don't know the history. They own the property now. Just read the clause. It'll take 5 minutes. The request was almost comforting in its familiarity. For 11 years, 5 minutes had meant whatever Dad needed it to mean. No. He stared at me. You're better at this than they are. Then they can hire me. His mouth tightened. So that's it? Yes. You got what you wanted. The brass key was in my hand before I realized I had taken it from my purse. For years, it had meant he could call, and I would come. A door opened because I was useful. No, I said. I stopped paying for what I wanted. Dad looked at me for a long moment. What does that even mean? There was a time I would have explained until he understood. That was another service I no longer provided. The key touched the desk. For a second, I thought I would leave it there. Then I picked it up again. Dad frowned. Why take that? It won't open anything after they change the locks. Exactly. I walked out. 4 months after closing, Daniel and I were driving to school when traffic stopped at the light across from the old flagship property. He saw it before I did. Mom. A lift had been parked beside the sign. 2 workers were removing the metal letters one at a time. Morgan Storage. The last word was already down. Only Morgan remained. For years, Dad had talked about those letters like they were proof that something survived. Grandpa's work, his work, our place, my place. Watching them come down did not feel good. That surprised me. Grief and relief can sit in the same seat without canceling each other. One worker loosened the final letter. The M tilted forward. Daniel watched through the passenger window. They're taking Grandpa's name down. Yes. The light stayed red. The lift lowered another piece toward the ground. Daniel looked at me. Do you want to stop? A year earlier, maybe even 6 months earlier, I would have. I would have pulled into the lot, watched every letter come down, tried to decide whether losing the sign meant losing something inside me. The light turned green. No. My foot moved to the gas. We drove on. That evening, the brass key was still on my kitchen counter. Daniel had left a school badge beside it, along with an old baseball ticket he wanted to keep for reasons he could not explain. A small cardboard box came down from the cabinet. The badge went in. The ticket went in. Then the key. Not a trophy. Not evidence. Not an inheritance. Just an old piece of brass that no longer opened anything. The lid closed. Morgan Storage no longer carried our name. For the first time in my life, that did not feel like being erased. The company could lose the Morgan name. I did not have to lose myself with it.